14 minutes to 8. I've been waiting for this all morning. And now to give you a bit of a background to this, Janelle, one of our listeners, called in and wanted us to find out through our history expert, Harold Peacock, about the 19th century death of Mrs. Collins at Spicer's Gap. Now, of course, Harold, with limited info, went out there and he has done just that. And I'm very pleased to say that Harold Peacock from History Out There joins me on the line. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Damo. Some good story to tell you today.
I'm looking forward to this one now because Janelle was on earlier for our Secret Santa, and I said, listen out after the 7:30 news because Harold has done it. He has tracked it down and got the story.
Yes, in fact, it's pieced together from a few different stories that are out there, but it all came together, and it's a remarkable piece of Darling Downs history.
Oh,
incredible.
Fantastic. All right, Janelle, if you're listening, sit back, relax, get ready for the history of Mrs. Collins at Spicer's Gap. Over to you, Harold.
Yeah, look, and there's a whole lot more to her story, including a number of tragic deaths and even attempt to erase her from history.
Oh.
Now, look, it all started off the Cunningham Highway, the end of Spicer's Gap Road. There's a four-wheel drive track that leads to a stone memorial to a long-lost burial ground for the dead at Spicer's Gap. Now, one of those commemorated is a Mrs. Collins, who the memorial records was the wife of Edward Collins and was killed in a dray accident, presumed to be in 1857. But that's not completely correct, and there's a lot more to the backstory. Now, the truth about the death of Mrs. Collins comes from an article in the Toowoomba Chronicle in 1863. Now, our Mrs. Collins was actually Mrs. Margaret Collins, who was an old resident of Toowoomba, and in 1863, and not 1857, she died in a fatal accident. She was on her way from Warwick to Ipswich on a bullock dray in the company of a man called Lambert. Now, that was probably Mr. Thomas Lambert, who was a Melbourne businessman who was here in Queensland taking a load of skins from Warwick to his new tannery in Ipswich. Anyway, the wheel of the dray in which they were travelling hit a rock. Mrs. Collins was thrown out onto her head and she was killed almost instantly. Now, the surviving the accident were her 4 children, aged under the age of 6. Now, Mrs. Collins was in fact a former transported convict by the name of Margaret Lane. She was from County Cork and Island and was transported to the pretty rough Van Diemen's Land back then for a term of 7 years, having been convicted of stealing money. Now, Margaret eventually got married in Sydney to another convict named Edward Collins. Now, Edward was from Worcester in England and was transported initially to Sydney for a term of 7 years for horse theft.
Oh.
Now, he was convicted of assault and, as a repeat offender, was retransported up here to Moreton Bay. Now, he must have loved it up here because after he and Margaret were married, they moved up here and settled in Warwick.
Right.
Now, Edward and Margaret had 4 children. Within a month of Margaret's awful death at Spicer's Gap, Edward married again. Now, the 4 existing children's births were registered not with Margaret as a mother, but as a second wife as a mother.
Oh.
And then Edward and his second wife then proceeded to have a further 8 more children of their own. So he had 12.
Well, there wasn't much TV back in those days.
No, well, that's right. You're on a trip from Warwick to Ipswich, can get a bit dull.
Yeah.
But one of the second batch of children, he had a run-in with the law and was arrested in Warwick and convicted in Gundawindi for horse stealing, which, of course, followed precisely in the footsteps of his convict father. But among Margaret's children in the first batch, like their mother, for 2 of them, their lives ended in tragedy. Now, Margaret's youngest child was named Joseph Collins, and he was only 1 year old at the time of her death. In 1890, there was a horse accident at Hendon on the Southern Downs, and Joseph, then aged 27, was killed instantly. You see, his horse, which was hung up against a fence, had broken away, and so he borrowed another to go after it. On getting into the saddle of the second horse, it began to really furiously buck, and Collins was thrown off. Now, he fell to the ground and broke his neck. Death was almost instantaneous, and it was a pretty similar end to his mother's. And another of Margaret's children was Lucy, who was just 3 when Margaret died. Now, Lucy at one time lived at 82 Taylor Street in Toowoomba, and the house is still there. So whoever's living there got the connection to this Mrs. Collins. But sadly, Lucy lived out her life in Toowoomba's Willowburn Mental Hospital. Now, Edward Collins, the husband that we started with, he and his second wife are supposedly buried in Allora, but of course, our Mrs. Margaret Collins, is buried in Spices Gap in a lost grave somewhere near the memorial. So the convict past of Mrs. Collins, her tragic death, lost grave, being erased from the lives of her children, and 2 of whom had really sad ends themselves, all add up to an amazing life on the Darling Downs that, look, we've only pieced together thanks to the question of our listener, Janelle. So thanks, Janelle. And we found that memorial, and now we know Mrs. Collins' story.
There you go. Isn't that amazing? And when you think about it, if you have a look at our Facebook, actually, there's a picture of the memorial. So you can have a little look at that. But all I can say, Janelle, is don't go near any horses.
Yeah, that's a stay off the bullock drays, I'd say.
That's right. Mate, what a remarkable story, and all generated out of the fact that one of our listeners to 4AK wanted to know a little bit more about the history of her family, and that's how it happened. So if anybody out there would like a similar type of investigation done on some history of their family, that's the best way to do it, isn't it?
Absolutely. Let us know. And look, the history we get might be out of old newspapers, it might be from memorials, or it might be from birth, deaths and marriages. So there's a whole heap of different areas that we can research and put them together for the first time, because this story of Mrs. Collins, there were bits and pieces of research that had been done before, but nothing had really been linked together, especially with the children. Adding that to the complete story of the convict past.
So there you go. The first time it has been told, and you heard it right here on 4AK. Mate, a great story. Thank you so much for doing that research on behalf of us and also Janelle. And we'll look forward to reading that story again on your website, which is?
Yes, historyouthere.com. And I love doing the research.
Fantastic, mate. You have a great week, and we'll look forward to catching up next week.
See you then.
There we go, our very own historian, historyouthere.com, and Harold Peacock. Read the story there, and if you've got any leads that you'd like investigated, email me at 4akbrecky@gmail.com. That's 4akbrecky@gmail.com, and we'll see what we can find out for you.